without further ado, Mr. Curt, to talk sidewalk planning. Dining.
Dining, yes. All right. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So, sidewalk dining introduction. So, sidewalk dining is something that has been in our planning documents for a while. I found it as early as the Downtown Vision Plan from 2012. It was repeated in the ULI study as recently as this past January. So it's something that's been out there for a while. The downtown businesses in particular have noted it as something that would be a benefit to their business. But the TAP grant investment is really what's precipitating the discussion now, is kind of why we're bringing it to you now from a timing perspective. And so what we're talking about is, I'll just define it real quick, because sidewalk dining could mean a lot of, could potentially mean different things to different people. How we're defining it is we're saying sidewalk dining, it means a portion of the public right-of-way that will be kept, used, maintained, held out to the public as a place for dining or food, beverage, or other refreshments could be consumed on premises. This includes the placing, locating of furniture within and other items within designated areas. We would also, if this were something the board wanted to discuss as a potential policy, I would also want to bring in the retail displays piece of that too, so that you're benefiting not just restaurants, but you're talking about all types of businesses. So before I talk just briefly about some of the other potential considerations, I wanted to read a quote. Matt Falkenberry actually found this today, and from one of the planning blogs that we follow, and it says, "I've spent the last month touring cities in Europe. There's something calming about the cafes, the architecture, and the cozy streets. During a particularly nice walk, my friend summarized the difference. European cities are built for people. American cities are built for cars." And what we're doing with the TAP grant, especially on East North Main Street, is we're trying to change that equation ever so slightly. It doesn't move the needle as far as we'd like to long term, but certainly with the sidewalk expansion plan for East North Main Street to be able to facilitate this kind of experience would start moving us towards a more pedestrian friendly town. So I mentioned a little bit about the why behind this. That's the TAP grant, and that theme is the overriding driver for this discussion. It's been in our town documents. We've had some community engagement throughout the TAP grant process as well, where businesses have noted that as a desire. Citizens have reflected positively on the concept drawings they've seen that show that as a possibility. And we've also done some preliminary outreach to some other towns in North and South Carolina, in particular Greenville, South Carolina, Wilmington, Hickory, Charlotte, to see how they do it. And finally, Main Street says that the development of Central Plazas is consistently a #1 initiative in revitalizing downtowns. Property values within a 3-block area can nearly triple as a result of these kind of improvements. So the TAP grant we're already investing, so I think that this would just help us to be able to just truly maximize that investment. So that's the reason. Are there initial?
So what are you looking for from the board? The okay to investigate? Get a discussion? What exactly are you looking for today?
To be able to, the okay from the board to go ahead and draft an ordinance that would facilitate outdoor dining and these kind of encroachments with 3 different parameters. The ordinance would include operational. So that's talking about things like hours of operation for the encroachment, what could be served within the right-of-way, what kind of products, food and drink. site, aesthetics, barriers, permitting, I would go ahead and outline all of that and then bring it back to the board for discussion.
Okay. Commissioner.
So how are you envisioning this looking? Where are areas that would be wide enough to have the tables? And you said that this would be town maintained, right? It would not be an extension necessarily of a particular restaurant and they maintain it? It's like, can somebody from South Main take it across the street to, the other side where other restaurants are? Can you just give me an idea of what you're envisioning?
Well, I would tell you that there's flexibility on a lot of that. So there's a lot of different ways that different towns do it, but in general, you would have your restaurant and you would be getting an encroachment into the public right-of-way directly adjacent to your restaurant or retail store. So no, it would not be a restaurant from one side of the street going to the other side of the street.
Well, I didn't mean like waiting on the tables or anything, but I didn't know if you meant like somebody could take out from the barbecue place and then go to tables set somewhere that's more like public use type of tables, or are you saying this is specifically for that restaurant?
This would be for that that restaurant or retail
Or
establishment.
whatever.
What typically happens is they would enter into an agreement with the municipality for that portion of the right-of-way that they would use as their dedicated display space, that sort of thing.
Basically, you're talking about the enactment of this state statute that around sidewalk dining. How do we do it, and how do we implement this with local authority?
Right.
That's what you're really talking about.
Right.
And we have to follow their guidelines and then put our own parameters around it.
That's right.
Yeah. Do you have a question?
When you brought this to the Main Street Board, you talked about the different requirements. If alcohol is served, there has to be barriers. What kind of barriers would be involved? Don't you need us to have a grip on what we really envision Main Street looking like before you can draft such an ordinance? Or are you intending to draft it with certain things already in mind?
Well, there would the possible parameters that I mentioned. So you'd have your operational ones, and that would be things like whether or not you can serve alcohol, or you're talking about how late can they sell, what can you display merchandise, or are we limiting it to the restaurants? And then on their site, are we?
Don't you want us to have that discussion before you draft it, or do you want to draft one with what your wish list is, saying yes alcohol, no alcohol, whatever, and bring that to us and have us say yes or no? Or do you want us to have a conversation now and say, do we think there should be alcohol on the sidewalk, yes or no? Do we think there should be barriers, yes or no? So that you have that before you draft. Which is your preference here?
Well, I would like to just draft what I see as the best practices, the overall,
Okay.
Taking a survey of 5 or 10 similar municipalities, and then that way we have something to start with,
Okay.
and then of course the board can
Okay.
kind of.
That's why I was just trying to get a grip on which way you were going to do it.
Yeah. Commissioner Burns?
On the sidewalks for the TAP grant, I know that that's going to be wide enough for tables, but when you go over to South Main, is there enough room for those restaurants to have it, with it be a safety with the pedestrians or not? Or that's going to be part of the guidelines as far as the distance and the,
There's
there's
two things with that. One, the in front of the restaurants on South Main would be DOT right of way. So
okay.
This, it's similar to our conversation about food trucks when we were talking about town right of way, and when you actually looked at where it would actually apply, there's very limited areas where something like this would apply, because there's very limited town maintained streets that fall within business oriented districts. So it would certainly impact East North Main.
So is that
most
the only
directly.
area right now that would be available and enough room?
You could do, South Church Street.
Okay.
If there were redevelopment along North Church Street. But as far as I think South Church and East North Main would be the ones right now who would be most directly impacted,
Okay.
or stand to take advantage of it. As far as the safety standpoint, then there would be, we would have to put in provisions for ADA, clear passage and things like that.
All right, thank you.
So basically, you're talking about putting an ordinance, drafting it, a structure, a framework, rule of thumb, 10 to 12 feet wide, so you got sidewalk and dining. And we don't have many of those places now or in the future, but as they come on board, you're looking at it from more a futuristic standpoint with possible limited implementation as the TAP grant unfolds. Because
Right.
one of the things, and I'd encourage everybody to go out and take a look, School of Government put a post out there, Coates Cannon, about sidewalk dining. And there's I understand why you want to put something together, because there's complexity. Could Dream Chasers do it? Well, they don't have a kitchen. But one of the requirements for sidewalk dining is you have some form of a kitchen. How do they overcome that? That's a big area there. So are we ruling out that part of the area? Not saying that I read through all these verbatim, but those are the things that you want to put down, I take it, and then go through it and bring it back to us and say, here's what it looks like, and then here's where we may be able to implement it when. It also may impact, if I'm reading you right, as we look to the sidewalk improvements in front of Nivens Price. Whatever we do with that, we have an eye towards that ordinance to allow something like that as well.
Sure.
And, or the corner lot, or those kind of things. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so, yes. And because there's future, there's limited implementation right now, but I think in the future,
Yeah.
it certainly fits with the vision.
I will,
Go ahead.
what do other towns do about the alcohol ordinance? I know right now you can't take alcohol outside of an establishment on the sidewalks. So would we have to redo the ordinance, or is there something that, with the way they capture it within the business itself, because that's kind of the boundary of the business? What do they do for that?
The ones who choose to allow alcohol, they follow the North Carolina ABC rules, which require a barrier. So they would have to have a barrier where you would not be able to, for example, enter the restaurant or enter the outdoor area except through the restaurant. So you can't just walk off the street into the patio.
Right.
That's the ins and outs of that. We'll be talking with the Waxhaw PD, but yeah, that's how that would work.
Yeah, and you're not suggesting that we have an open container. We tackle that one at this point.
No.
Yeah. Okay. So I
Would
think,
you like-
so consensus-wise, do I hear that the board would like Kurt to do some work to come forward with that? Okay. So,
Okay.
Um,
That works.
okay.
Thank you.
How long, how do you want to do this? Do you want to draft something, bring it back, talk about it in another work session, and just iterate thoughts and ideas? How best can we help you?
I will draft something, but in addition, I'll develop some sort of a cheat sheet where it highlights the key points. And so it's not just a 20-page single-space document that everyone's trying to deal with at once. I think it'd be more productive if we just pull out the main categories and can go through it together.
Yeah, what I did notice, I asked the question because what I noticed is that a number of municipalities that have it are going through and refining it. The law is relatively new, 2013, 2014. They've learned and experienced from it, and now they're kind of stepping back and saying, okay, how do we tweak this and make it better? Chapel Hill was one of them I just pulled up and looked at, and they're saying, okay, right now, here's your application checklist because we're redoing the ordinance because we learned this, we learned this, we learned
Yeah.
this kind of thing.
Right.
And so there's a lot of stuff to pull down from that aspect. So thus the need for iteration, probably. All right. Any other questions for Curt?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the only other item is to begin discussion about transition planning and a couple things that I think we have to acknowledge, and I'm not, first of all, we certainly thank Matt for stepping up and stepping into the acting town manager role. One of the things that we have to consider as a board, and we have to do it in public, not now, but what kind of compensation do we want to give, bonus do we want to give for the additional responsibilities. I'd ask that everybody start thinking about that. I've asked Wendy to start thinking about what do other towns do in that range, because we're in uncharted water. We'll try to treat you as fairly as possible, Matt, and obviously we'll treat you fairly, but we also want to acknowledge
So
the
it's
additional
not,
work.
This isn't it?
Yeah, that isn't it. This is it. You get the additional cup. But that's one thing, and we will need to move on that in July. Hopefully, we'll have progressed far enough, and it's a retroactive bonus, but it's not quite the same as when we had Greg Maher as an interim. He was an official interim manager for a long period of time, and that was a very specific compensation element per week. But we'll get some guidelines and get that out. The league's also looking into it as well for us. That's one thing. So be thinking about what's fair. It's a matter of record, and so records. So we will pull that down, and then we'll have to discuss it publicly. As far as an interim manager, here's how it works in terms of working with the league. The league has a very confidential list of retired managers who are willing to give back their time, compensated for it, on an interim basis. They're limited and restricted as to how much they can earn per year because they're officially retired they're in the retirement system for the state. They're retired managers. What the league is willing to do is they keep a list of potentials. They will look at geo proximity, town needs, town size. They're bound by how much they can make and the time frame that we put around it. They believe they have a couple of potential candidates, and the question that we have to ask ourselves is, are we willing to engage with the league to begin that search? Because they don't give us the name, they don't compete. They select, and then they offer us a candidate, and we decide if we want to interview, if we like, dislike, whatever. If we like, we can accept. If we don't like, we go to the next one. But their rule of thumb is no competition whatsoever, and they leave it to the league because they're all experienced and they're all relatively geographic centric. I will tell you this much, that at this point in time, there are 32 interim management slots out there right now. There is it's the highest number they've ever seen in terms of management movement around the state. They can't guarantee names at this point in time, but they have a couple in mind, actually 3. What are your thoughts? Do you want to pursue with the league? How much time do you want to spend on it, et cetera? Because they'll start getting us candidates right after the first of the month if that's something we want to do. They just need to understand the parameters we want to put around it. One other thing that they have thrown out is, as well, is there is no need for an interim manager to be on site 5 days a week. More often than not, it's 3 days, maybe 4, available for phone calls. But if you're really doing that job as an interim, you ought to be able to focus on keeping the operations running. You're not managing people. They rely on the directors, the department heads to do the management of the people. and they don't get involved in it. They really focus on the operational part of it. So, thoughts, questions? Because basically, it's a matter of giving the league the okay or the not okay, and the parameters going around it.
Do they send one interim person at a time for us to interview, or would they send 3 and then just one at a time?
What they do is, here's our requirements. We're a town of Waxhaw. We're roughly 18,500 people. We got 70-some employees. We got a mix of services. We don't do utilities, but we do police. Here's our candidates in the locale that they could pick from. We think that Joe Blow or Josephine Blow is the best one. Do you want to interview that person? They stop right there. We either decide to interview, or somebody knows something about the person and says no. We do that, but you get the chance to interview, and you make a determination on that individual right then. You don't get a list of candidates from an interim standpoint. So they're very regimented about it, just the rules of how they've got that set up. It gets back to the ICMA ethics. You don't compete with other managers, and they're driven by those ethic responsibilities. So,
Has Waxhaw gone through this process before? Is this
Yeah.
what we've done before?
yeah, when Warren announced his resignation to move to Hickory, we used it. They brought forward, and we hired on an interim basis Leonard Barefoot as the interim manager, and he was here for 60, 90 days. I can't remember. So they look at it. Keep in mind, they're not. One of the things that we have to think about is how quickly do we want to move on permanent, because cut to the chase, we will not get candidates if we go beyond September. There's nobody that's going to apply for a management position during election season. Just cut to the chase. They won't. They don't want to get wrapped up in it, and I can't blame them, because basically they get themselves into a position that it's a lose-lose situation. The other aspect of that is one of the ways that the contracts have been structured in Waxhaw has been to expire the contract and then renew on the off election year to avoid that very similar phenomena. So we don't have to make that determination now in terms of how quickly we want to move. Still have to look at some of that in terms of the hiring process, but we will have to address that very early on in July. What month are we in? June? July, yeah, July. So.
My point just being that if this is what Waxhaw has done before, I have no problem using this process again.
The gentleman that actually runs it, and Wendy's not here, and she knows, Hartwell Wright is the chief HR consultant for the league. So he runs this program in addition to all of his outside consulting work, does a phenomenal job with it. Spent an hour with him yesterday just walking through, and he grilled about Waxhaw. He trying to update the specifics. He knows the mechanics, want to make sure he understood the services, and so if we choose to, he's ready to go out and look.
I like the idea. It sounds
Okay.
very professional and fair.
Okay. So I will let Hartwell know tomorrow that start looking. And then, obviously, next week is the 4th, and it's an off week for a lot, but we will have to, we will get, Melody, the end of this week, all the applications will be in, then they go to the Board of Elections to get validated, and then you pull your packages together for us, so we'll have by Wednesday the 10th, recognizing that we got a 4th of July holiday.
Yes, that's correct.
So when we get those packets, that'll be a good time for us to just kind of plan to get together to talk about this other transitional aspect that we can start to calendar. And we'll get some input on that from some outside sources, how best to go about it. my options to go about it, not how, not necessarily, there's no one right way to go about it. People have used all sorts of techniques to do it. It's just, we are in that time period now, summer, which may make it a little difficult. So, okay, we'll go with that. We'll plan on a potential get-together on the 10th to finalize our transition plan. And hopefully, Hartwell will have some names for us that we can move quickly on and go from there. So, other questions, thoughts, comments? Ready to move forward? Ready to adjourn and come back at 6:30. All right. Yeah. Hey, Kurt?